once they were finally done, they told me to go take a shower to get rid of all the blood and get ready because they were going to go get a guy. And I had no idea what that meant. If I serviced enough men, let's be real, if I was raped by enough men that night, and my dad was happy with me, that meant
Amanda Pulley, a leading advocate for fighting human trafficking,
co-founded Pulley Consulting, dedicated to supporting organizations in effectively combating human trafficking and providing comprehensive support to victim survivors.
She transforms adversity into action. As a prior victim of the IBLP cult, Amanda is a survivor of human trafficking.
How did you get unbroken?
and freedom is worth the fight.
So you had just finished talking about this violent
Oh yeah, okay.
rape from both of them, and they told you to go take a shower and make some food because they're
And
going to
bringing
go.
somebody over.
Yeah, they were going to go get this guy, and I had no idea what that meant at all. I soon found out that meant that I was going to be required to give sexual services of any kind to any man who walked through the door. There's no framework for that.
Mm-hmm.
And how old are you at this time?
About 16 and a half.
Yeah.
So and this all happened pretty rapidly because it sounds like you had the situation with the 28-year-old. You found out that you were pregnant. He beat you up. The suicide attempt, the admission to the hospital, and then bam, you're trapped in a trailer.
Yep.
And were you able to talk to your mom at any point?
No, I didn't talk to my mom. I wasn't even allowed to go outside. You know, they very much controlled every part of my life. The only control that I had, as sick as this is, was that if I serviced enough men, let's be real, if I was raped by enough men that night,
Mm-hmm.
and my dad was happy with me, that meant I was able to wear hot pink lingerie, which meant I got to sleep with my dad that night. That was my reward.
Mm-hmm.
And so I would work really, really hard because at least if I was sleeping with my dad and being raped by my dad, it meant that he must care something about me.
Right. It's not these other people.
Right. It's not some dude I don't even know. And so I would do extra and try to be the perfect person
Mm-hmm.
so that I could wear this hot pink lingerie. Needless to say, I hate the color hot pink. Like, everybody's like, well, why do you wear black all the time? Well, first off, I'm not that girly to begin with, but anything hot pink, I'm like, yeah, I'm out. Like, don't need that color in my life, right?
Right.
So that's how I lived for months. You know, everybody always wants to know, how long were you there? I don't know for sure. It all bled together.
Yeah.
All I could think was, I don't want to be here.
Right.
I don't want to exist. But I became so numb,
Mm-hmm.
I didn't even feel anymore.
Yeah.
There was no feeling. The first time I remember feeling was this guy, this youth leader, who was there the whole time this was happening and was part of all of it as well, had told me to come. He was standing in the door to the outside.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, hey, get out here. And I questioned him for the first time in what was probably months of me being there. And he smacked me across the face and told me not to question him and to get outside. I walk outside and he's smoking a cigarette and drinking a beer.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember thinking, that maybe if I can get that. Now, remember, I grew up in this religious home. We didn't smoke, we didn't drink,
Right.
we didn't listen to rock and roll, and we didn't run with people who did.
Right.
Right? Like, it was very strict. All I thought was, maybe that'll help me. Maybe I won't feel
Right.
anything if I get it. And so, for whatever reason, all of a sudden this fire was coming up in my spirit. And I tried to grab the cigarette from him, and I got it almost up to smoke it, and he whacks it out of my hand. So as he's whacking it out of my hand, I grab the beer, get it almost up to my lips, and he whacks it out of my hand, and he sticks his finger in my face, and he says, "My good girls don't do that." And immediately my brain was like, what are you talking about? You've taken everything good away from me. I am not a good girl. And he said, go back inside. I'll be back in a minute, meaning I'm going to go get a buyer. My dad at this time was in the back bedroom with some other woman. And I heard his truck leave as I started to close the door. I look on the table, and my car keys and that cell phone he bought me were sitting on the table. And as clear as day, I heard a voice say, "Go, run now. You're my good girl, and I love you." I got in the car, and I started pulling away down the trailer parking lot, and there was one road in to get to where the trailer park was. And I remember being terrified. What if he sees me trying to leave?
Right.
Right.
He will kill me.
Yeah.
And then thinking, well, that's better, right? Like, I was so conflicted. And when I got in, there was a tape, not a CD, a tape in the tape deck. And I must have bumped it as I got in the car. And it started playing a song. I always forget if it's Phillips, Craig and Dean or Casting Crowns, old school Christian artist. And I don't even know how I got it because I wasn't allowed to listen to that. But it was in my car, and it was the song When God Ran, talking about the prodigal son and how Jesus loved him, and he ran to him with open arms, waiting for him to come back. And again, I'm still thinking I'm the one doing something wrong.
Right.
So that song, I got tears coming down my face going, maybe God will forgive me for all of this, right? And this is before GPS. I'm trying to get out of there, trying to figure out, how do I even get home? I'm 2 hours away from where I grew up. I had no idea, like, where to even go. And I pull out and I see the highway. What's interesting is about a year ago, my husband and I went back to this place. I had not been back since I was 16, 17 years old.
Oh, wow.
And the highway you can literally see from the trailer. And the road out, it's like a dirt road, but it's got a field. Like, the amount of fear that I had
Right.
wasn't really needed, but it shows where I was. Like, it wasn't needed from like the practical standpoint of how the roads look, right?
Sure.
But it shows the amount of trauma
Oh, yeah.
that I had experienced being held there.
And just the fear of him catching you, I would imagine, like the tunnel vision you would have had, and the inability to get your muscles to coordinate to actually do the driving,
Right.
and turn the key, and like it that had to feel almost impossible.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Trying to think in any way was hard, much less like, okay, how do I drive a car? I haven't been behind the wheel for a while, and I'm still a young driver to begin with,
Right.
and so I get on the highway and I finally find myself near somewhere that I'm like, oh, I recognize this. I think I can get home from here. So I call my grandpa, and my grandpa's the only one throughout this whole scenario who's like, something's not right. But because religiosity is what changed his life, he didn't do anything about it. Like, he was kind of lost in his own world. and he didn't know what to do to help me.
Okay.
And he tried asking me like what's really going on a couple times, and I just shut down. I didn't feel safe to even tell him.
How could you? Every time you've opened up, it's been thrown back in your face and your nose shoved in it, saying
Right.
you're bad. How could you feel comfortable telling anybody?
Yeah. So I called him and I finally said, hey, something really is wrong. I need help. And so he told me to go to his best friend's house. His best friend let me stay there throughout the rest of the summer. I homeschooled myself that summer because I found out that the overachiever in me, who always took way more classes than I needed, actually, even though I pretty much missed my 11th grade year, all I needed was a credit and a half to graduate high school, according to state law. So I homeschooled myself, got myself into a college, and thought my life was changing. Like I was going to get away from this guy. And I get to college, and my pastor had called the college and told them that I was a whore and that they should be very cautious with me because the men on campus are in danger.
Oh my God.
Wow.
Okay. Before we hit that, I would like to go back a little bit. You just escape from this trailer prison. Okay. Orchestrated by your boyfriend, sorta, pedophile, and your trafficker, and your father, pedophile trafficker. You escape, and now your grandfather puts you with friend, and you're talking about taking classes and getting into college. But what was it there or during that time? Like, how did you go from being about as broken as I could imagine a person can be to saying, I want to get my diploma?
All I could think was that'll get me out of here. I've got to get out of here somewhere, somehow. And the only thing I knew, I was still so much in that cult mindset that this was the furthest college away that I knew of. Like, I didn't even know there were state universities. I didn't know that I could go to a college outside of like the cult world I grew up in. Like that call wouldn't have even mattered had I went to like Penn State. Right? But it mattered because I went to this podunk little cult college.
I see.
But it was all I knew. It was either that or Bob Jones University, which had pink and blue sidewalks.
Right.
Like those were the two I knew about.
But so you arrive at Grandpa's friend's house. And how did you go from there to I'm going to get my diploma? Like, what was that time period? What was happening then?
I jumped back into taking care of people. Okay. So like when I train people on trauma, I talk about how we have trauma brain and then we have what Janina Fisher calls going on with normal life brain. And we can switch between the two. This guy's granddaughter lived with him. And so I was her babysitter all summer. And he paid me to babysit his granddaughter while I finished getting my diploma so that I could go to this college. I think what happened was that it switched my brain into this going on with normal life. I still hated God. I still, they kept trying to make me go to church. I would not walk into a church. Like, you could not have paid me enough money, or you would have to have killed me or drugged me to get me into a church. And oddly enough, I even tried calling my trafficker a couple times that summer because I didn't really believe I deserved the freedom.
I get that.
So I was wrestling with, I know I can get free. And when I was in that going on with normal life brain, that more prefrontal cortex thinking, I had all this resiliency and was like, watch me, motherfucker. I'm going to get away from all of you and I'm going to prove y'all wrong. when I was in that traumatized brain, I was still extremely anorexic. I was working out way too much. I could barely breathe. I was having panic attacks constantly and nightmares constantly. But I knew if I just waited, they'd eventually go away. And so I kept telling myself, you can't kill yourself. You can't kill yourself. And so I was flopping between these two worlds because that's literally what it felt like. I was almost like two completely different people.
I get that. It's kind of like, if you have a woman or a man who's in a horrible home life situation that's horribly traumatic, but yet they can go to work and be, like a superstar.
Right.
Because
Like compartmentalize it.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like you have your hat and you turn it around and you're a different person.
Yeah.
Did you ever see that movie?
Yeah.
They are able to turn this off, turn this on. And that's what you were doing during this time period. Okay. So in that time period, you escaped, you have a purpose for this other person, this service for this other person, and you decide to do the school thing. So your pastor from your old church called this college, and I just can't believe people are like this. But so he called the college and said all this stuff about you, this horrible stuff about you. Now you indicated that there was a consequence to that.
Oh yeah. They put me on restriction, but they did not tell me I was put on restriction. And so this guy comes up and there was like we weren't allowed to dance. So it was like an ice cream social, I think is what they called it, where we were allowed to go sit across from guys and eat ice cream. But like we weren't really allowed to date because your parents had to approve of things. I mean, it was weird. Okay, so anyway, he invites me to go. Well, he is very high up in this cult environment. And so I was so excited. I was like, okay, this is my redemption. I'm going to marry some awesome dude and maybe I will for sure get into heaven. Again, all those beliefs about, well, you need somebody to redeem you, you need a man to help you, are still in my head.
And so just because I don't know all the vernacular.
Yeah.
So when you say a man to redeem you, if I know nothing about Christianity, what does that mean?
So there's a story about Ruth and Boaz in the Bible. And Ruth is this woman who her husband dies. And in the culture there, because she was of her background, she was not originally from Israel. She was an outcast in society, and she would go to the fields, and the good farmers would leave extra crops in their field for the poor. And so she would go and gather this extra crop for her and her mother-in-law. But this guy named Boaz always had them leave extra. Well, the mother-in-law tells her, you need to go and lay at Boaz's feet, which she could have been killed for because in that day it would have been seen as an act of prostitution, even though there was no sexual anything going on. But she lays at his feet and asks him to redeem her, meaning Boaz was supposed to be this picture of God, that you're an outcast, but I'm going to take care of you and I'm going to bring you into my family and love you as if you've never been an outcast.
Okay.
And so that whole story for most of my life was used as, see, you need a man to be like Boaz so that God will pull you into his family.
Okay.
So really, the story in and of itself is a beautiful allegory, but they took it and twisted it.
Right. As humans can do.
Right. Because the whole point of the story is you don't need anybody but God. God's the one who redeems you, because Boaz was supposed to be an allegorical picture of Jesus. And so with their twisting and everything, I thought that I was taught that is what I needed, was a man to be able to usher me into heaven. And so I'm again back in this place stuck. I get in big trouble for saying, I didn't even get to go with the guy. They found out because he went to his soccer team and was bragging that he got the whore to agree to go to this ice cream social with him. And the coach then discloses what he has been told about me to the boys soccer team.
Wow.
And I start getting calls from these students who are being taught to be pastors. So they're getting up and preaching a couple days a week. They're working in churches to be pastors. They're calling me, asking me how much I charge and threatening to rape me. And I'm like, well, shit.
Yeah.
Now what?
Yep.
Right? Like, I thought I was starting this new life. I thought it was going to be different. On top of that, the school found out I was on medication because I was having nightmares so bad. I finally went to the doctor and asked for help. Well, they put me on, it's probably Prozac. I don't even remember, but like something to help me sleep.
Sure.
And I literally had to give them my pills and watch them flush them down the toilet. And they told me that if they found out I got more pills, that I would be kicked out.
Oh my God.
In my mind, if I got kicked out, I was going back home.
Right.
And I sure as hell was not going back home.
What was the grounds for taking your medicine?
Mental health is not real. It's a spiritual thing. And you need to pray and read your Bible more so that Jesus can forgive whatever sin you committed.
It's a spiritual attack.
Yes.
Yeah. It's a demonic possession, or
Yeah.
it's a disconnect from God.
Yeah.
I always thought the same thing.
Yep. Absolutely.
Oh my God. And I'm sitting here going, you can't stop those medicines abruptly. Like that.
Right. Then, yeah. Because you're a PA, right? Yeah. Everything in you is going, ah. Yeah. So I meet this other guy there who is literally sitting in class slashing his arms with a knife. Okay? And the professor is not saying anything. He's seeing this. And they're like, oh yeah, that's just so-and-so. It'll be fine. We know his dad. And I'm like, somebody really should help him.
Yeah, it's a problem.
Yeah. So throughout my whole life, there's this theme of having a big heart and wanting to help people. I always rooted for the underdog. I always helped the person everybody else hated. You know, that was just who I was at my core. And so I was like, okay, if nobody's going to help him, I'm going to help him. I am completely fucked up. I didn't swear then, but that's what I would have said. I am so messed up, and yet I'm not doing that. So I've got to be able to help this guy somehow.
I understand.
And so I start having conversations with him. Well, a few months later, he starts becoming extremely trying to control me. Well, you can't talk to other guys on campus. Well, you can't talk to that girl.
This is the guy who was cutting himself.
Yes.
Okay.
And I go to the dean of students and I ask for help. And he said, well, that's your fault because you're a whore.
Oh my God.
And I was like, okay, don't know what to do now. So I see this guy walking across campus and he sees me and all of a sudden he starts running towards me, this random third guy, okay?
Okay.
He is running towards me and he goes, hey, aren't you so-and-so's friend, talking about the guy who was slicing his arm? And I'm like hesitantly going, maybe? Who are you? He goes, well, I'm his best friend. He says that he wants to marry you and they won't let you guys be together. So I wanted to let you know, like, I would help facilitate a date off campus so y'all can be together. And I'm like, dude, I don't want anything to do with him. I was trying to help him. Long story short, I think this is my knight in shining armor because he stood up for me.
Right.
And his dad is a professor there.
Okay. This third person we're
This
talking
third
about.
person. His
Okay.
dad was a professor at the college. In the cult world that I grew up in, he was like marrying Prince William. You know, like it was like the heavens opened up and here you go, marry this guy.
Yeah.
Right.
So he went and told his dad he wanted to date me. His dad was like, absolutely not. She does not deserve our status, yada, yada. And he goes, I don't care. I'm going to date you anyway. What I don't realize is how messed up this guy is. He's narcissistic. He's suicidal. He's got all kinds of issues going on in his own life. But all as I hear is, I'll protect you.
Right.
Right.
I won't let somebody do that to you again.
Right.
Some stability.
And he believed me when I finally started sharing little bits of my story. No one had believed this.
Right.
So I married him. We were married for 12 and a half years. It was a completely controlling marriage, spiritually controlling, mentally controlling. He was extremely narcissistic. One of his friends had found out about this 5K that was going on, and I was still a runner. And I went to run this 5K. It was an anti-trafficking org. And I was just like the rest of the world. I thought that happened over in India or Honduras,
Right.
but not here in the US.
No.
And so I go to the 5K. I find out, wait, they have a home right here. I was in Minnesota at the time. And I was like, man, they have a home here. I've been sexually abused. Maybe I can empathize with these women. So I go in and I talk to the director, and she's asking me about my story, and she starts prodding a little bit. And she hands me a book by Rebecca Bender called Roadmap to Redemption. She's a national survivor leader here in the US. And I start reading this book, and I'm like, holy shit, that's the thing that happened to me. You know, because my whole life I explained it like, well, this weird thing happened when I was a teenager, but it was my fault, but it was weird, and I don't know how to explain
Yeah,
it.
you didn't have words to put to it.
No words. And I start reading about human trafficking, and I'm like, oh, wait. That's what this was. So then I start going to therapy because I'm like, well, now that I know what it is, I'm going to go tell a therapist. It took me 4 therapists to find somebody who wasn't like, yeah, that doesn't happen here, honey.
Wow.
Yeah.
And so finally found this great therapist, start working through things. And I keep telling her, I'm having these nightmares all the time. I don't know why I'm having them. And she's like, well, those are called flashbacks. And, you know, let's put you on medication again. But even with medication, they were still happening, and I couldn't figure it out. So, you know, he joined the military. My ex-husband joined the military. He's at basic, and I didn't have any events while my ex-husband wasn't there. I couldn't figure it out. And I was talking to my therapist about it, and she's like, that's weird. You would think when he's not there, you would be more insecure and feel even more unsafe.
Right.
Right.
His first night back, in the middle of the night, and I wake up to my ex on top of me, raping me.
Wow.
He was using what my therapist told him as my triggers to rape me in the middle of the night. So these events that had been happening for a while in my marriage were actually
They're actually
caused
happening.
by him. They weren't a flashback. They were real events.
I bet that there are people who have not had significant long-term repetitive trauma who would hear that and not understand how that was possible. I would imagine people thinking to themselves, wait a minute, well, once you wake up enough, wouldn't you know? Or in questions like that. Have you heard things like
Oh,
that?
yeah, absolutely.
When this was happening to you, you probably went to another place all the time, right? So what was reality was blurred with this escape thing in your mind all the time. And I have no idea if that's what happened, but I'm just like trying to imagine based on what I've been exposed to that would have been part of your survival.
Absolutely.
And so now when things are happening and they're triggers, it would be so easy to be unclear. Is this one of these things that you're imagining? You're going somewhere else? Is it happening again? Like I absolutely can see that. But I'm saying this because if anyone is listening to this and asking these questions, I'm trying to address it.
Yeah.
Up front. There is a plausible explanation of how this can happen in people who've had to endure such horrific trauma and have a survival technique to get through it when it's happened for over a long period of time.
And one of those things is like an immediate disassociation, even before it's conscious. And so it makes total sense to me how, if this were happening to you in your sleep, you would start to disassociate even before you're awake.
Right.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, so Janina Fisher is one of the world's leading trauma experts. And she explains a trigger as, if your grandma passes away and you walk in and you see her picture or maybe a necklace or something that was special to her, you will go, oh, that makes me think of grandma. But you are still present in that room. You can look around and go, oh, grandma's Bible's there or her jewelry's there, but I'm still in my house, right? When you experience a trauma trigger, what you think, smell, feel, experience is right back in that traumatic situation that happened. You don't know where you are.
Right.
Your brain completely dissociates and puts you somewhere else. For some of us at different times, that can be even a happy place. I have friends who talk about, one was telling me, like, she used to see when she would dissociate this elephant who would come play with her. And that's where she would go. Another one was telling me, like, oh, I went to a field and I would run around in this flowery field and that's all I would see during that time. Right? So our brains are really amazing organs that protect us in those traumatic experiences. But when we separate, we don't know that we're separating. And we don't know that we're not fully present where we were.
Right.
So seeing that my therapist had told him what my triggers were,
Right.
it would have been very easy for him to utilize that one trigger very quickly. And I would have automatically separated, like what you're saying, and went somewhere else and not even known what was real versus not real.
Right. Okay. Thank you for walking us through that. And you said it much more elegantly than I did, but I wanted to make sure, I wanted to put it out there because I can almost hear people, these questions popping up in people's minds who have never had this dissociative.
Yeah, it was
experience.
a great question.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. So, I'm with him for years. I figure out, wait a second, this is happening. But I got out of the cult to a point, but we're still in religious settings, in churches that are super religious, right? And, he was not going to let me miss church on Sundays. He controlled much of my life.
Okay.
And so I wanted to divorce him, but I was always told it was a sin to divorce a man. And it didn't matter if he was abusing you. You found a way to forgive him 7 times 7 and over and over and over, even past that, and you stay married to him. Like, one of the pieces of advice was probably not unlike what you were given, that I should stay married to him and in the same house for at least 7 years to give him that number 7, because apparently that's the number of perfection. And so we're supposed to just not be in the same room, but I needed to stay married to him for 7 years. And if after 7 years he's not repentant or recovered from all of this, then I could potentially have grounds for divorce. So I read a book called The Life-Saving Divorce by Gretchen Baskerville. And it changed my world.
Okay.
Because it goes through the Bible and proves how God does not intend, nor is it his heart for us to be in abusive marriages. And that by there being abuse, the marriage was void the minute the abuse started. Because that is not what God has for his children. And it blew my mind.
Yeah.
So I started walking out the process of leaving him. It was an excruciating process.
Yeah.
But long story short, I was able to get free. During that time when all of this was happening, I spoke at a conference, and my current husband, I met him at a conference, and
This is like the trafficking advocacy group
Yep.
that you were working with. Okay.
yeah, so I was sharing my story at this trafficking conference, and I met my husband there. Well, he's now my husband. We spent quite a few years just as friends. And one of the things that made me recognize how abused I was in my marriage was I was in a car accident. My car was totaled. I had a massive concussion. And having a concussion after all of the physical abuse I had endured was a big deal. Like, doctors were pretty concerned.
Yeah.
So even when I'm doing like stand-up MMA and people are like hitting at my face, I'm always like, should I really be doing this? Like,
Right.
Yeah.
maybe I should be a little cautious. And then, I just like it too much. And I just don't care anymore.
Yeah.
But, I do kind of let the guys know, like, hey, you probably shouldn't hit me with all you got. Like,
Yeah.
be nice. And they're always great about it. But I had this concussion, and my ex-husband did not come to the scene to pick me up. He was like, oh, well, I don't get off work for like an hour. Can you just
Wow.
hang out? And then a couple days later, my current husband, John, was going to come stay with us because we live near the airport, and he had to, he was speaking at a different conference and wanted to just stay overnight until his plane the next morning. And he comes and he goes, Amanda, you're not okay. Like, you can't even speak in a sentence. He's like, and he's telling my ex-husband, you need to take her to the hospital. Like, something's wrong.
Right.
And he's like, no, she doesn't need that. And he finally said, if you don't, I will.
Wow.
Which really ticked my ex-husband off.
I bet.
Right? Like, so he puts me in the car and screams at me the whole way to the hospital about what a piece of shit I am. Because I'm ruining his night because he wanted to come home and drink a beer and not do anything. And so God used my current husband to teach me what true friendship was, to teach me there was nothing inappropriate about our relationship. We were legitimately friends. And I didn't know what that was.
Right.
I didn't know what it was like for someone to actually truly care about me in that way. After I started working with the anti-trafficking agency, my boss and I never know what to call her. She's kind of like my surrogate mom, my best friend, my mentor. I met her there, and those three people really started showing me, wait a second, I'm lovable. Like, I didn't know that somebody could love me. I didn't even know to love me. I didn't even know to like me. In fact, all as I thought was, I still was of the opinion that, like, if I could just not exist, it would be better. Like, I know I'm trying to help people get out of trafficking at this point. Because I was in my domestic violence marriage for a few years while I was helping women get free from their abusive relationships, right? So just like you were saying earlier, I would go to work and everybody thought I was great, and I would go home and be screamed at and throw up against the wall and, abuse, and nobody, they wondered, right? But they had no idea how bad it really was or what was really going on, right? And so at some point during this process of getting divorced, my husband said, hey, you should read a book called Abba's Child. and I started reading this book. It's by Brennan Manning. And I started recognizing that I was attaching God to my dad. And my dad was a piece of shit. And I thought God was sitting up in heaven with a scorecard, waiting to hit me upside the head because I didn't do what he wanted me to, or I wasn't perfect enough, or I wasn't good enough, or I was too much. And so I was making myself little. I was trying to be less than a blimp so that I could maybe earn enough favor to like slide into heaven somehow.
Right.
And I would have told you I didn't believe that I had to work my way to heaven, that Jesus came and he died and whatnot. But I could never figure it out because I was like, why would you die for somebody you don't even like?
Right.
You didn't even realize that you believed you were unlovable because it wasn't even on the radar.
Correct.
Because it was so impossible.
Yeah, so I didn't know who I was. I didn't know what colors I liked. I didn't know what kind of food I liked. I remember the first time after being free from all this abuse, seeing fall for the first time, I just cried like the whole season. And I was like, is it always like this? And my friends were like, what do you like? Yeah. Like, I know the trees are pretty, but like, this is a whole different level of crying,
Yeah.
you know? And I'm like, no, it's so beautiful. I've never seen color before, you know? And I started recognizing, wait a second, my trauma response as a child was to submit and attach. And I mean, we talk about fight, flight, and freeze, but we forget that there's two more, submit and attach, are two more trauma responses people have. And when our abuse starts so much as such a young child, our brain goes, the only way for you to survive is to submit. And sometimes even that freeze is like animals playing dead so the predator doesn't kill them.
Right.
Right? And so I just learned to attach or submit and basically play dead. And so what I started realizing is, wait a second, even through the work in anti-trafficking I was doing, I see my fighter come out. Man, if you came after one of the girls I was helping, I was going to tear you a new one. And I would do it all above board. But like, I mean, I had an officer one time call one of my girls a prostitute. Man, she looked at me and she was like, ooh, you shouldn't have said that in front of my advocate. Because I had his sergeant on the phone and your officer just did this. And he like,
Right.
I mean, he was reprimanded and in trouble like that, you know? And I knew how to do it for someone else. I knew how to stand up and protect others.
But you didn't think you deserved it.
No, because I didn't even deserve to be alive. If I could walk through a day without being raped, that was success. Like, that was all I deserved.
Right.
You know, if I could have money to pay for my food that night, well, that was more than I deserved because I didn't even deserve to eat. You know, I had like 15 years worth of an eating disorder because I didn't think I deserved anything. And so it wasn't until reading that book and getting free from all the abuse once and for all. My husband is the most amazing man. He told me, I asked him the other day, we were talking about me coming and doing this podcast, and I just asked, we were just talking about lots of different things, and he said, you know, my one goal, our whole relationship, whether we were friends or getting married, was I wanted you to just be you. And to know that you were loved no matter what that you was. I didn't even know what me was.
Right.
And the last couple years have been filled with me going, wait a second. I am learning and becoming more my authentic self. Because, yeah, some people would say, well, are you a Christian? I don't know. I love Jesus. I don't identify with all that shit. Right? I love Jesus. I think he adores me. And I'm not scared to say it. I don't think I've ever been separated from him. I don't think he goes, well, you're going to hell and you're going to heaven. I think he just loves people. I don't get it. I don't love everybody in the world, but he does. Like, he created us. I think he loves us. I think that, like, it's almost weird. Like, I pause because it's still almost weird to come out of my mouth.
Right.
I think I'm pretty freaking awesome. Like, I think that I'm good at school. I'm in the middle of a master's program and I have straight A's. I'm an honors student at a graduate program, and I didn't graduate freaking high school in a normal way.
Right.
Right? Like, I am smart. I have talked to senators and politicians and all kinds of people, from victim survivors to some of the top people in the military. It doesn't matter. Like, I don't care who you are. I've gotten to this place where I'm just, if you like me, great. If you don't, there's the door. Like, I'm comfortable in my own skin.
Right.
I don't look in the mirror and go, man, you're fat, you're ugly, you're stupid. I look in the mirror and go, damn, like, you actually look at what your body's been through. And it's on a jiu-jitsu mat kicking the ass out of that 350-pound man. Now, granted, I'm a one straight white belt. I ain't kicking the ass out of anybody who's not letting me kick their ass. But still, to be able to have fun and roll with these huge guys and not be afraid.
So
It's crazy.
So help me understand. So you read this book. It started to open your eyes. You started to see color again, or for the first time, perhaps.
Yeah.
And I imagine this was like an incremental thing.
Oh, yeah.
Over time, and you had to have like affirmations from your current husband and new friends that you formed, and this all has helped you so much. What I'm searching for is, how did you get unbroken?
I've been thinking about that for the last 24 hours, knowing that was probably going to be a question you would ask me.
And you may not have an answer, but
The best answer I can give you is, I learned who I was. And through, yes, I've used therapy. I've done just about every therapy out there. And I'm still doing therapy, because healing is like peeling back the layers of an onion, right? It just keeps going. But the more I learned that I was loved, that the God of the universe created me, and he loves me, and he thinks I'm special, and he sings over me, and he dances with me, and he thinks that I'm the coolest girl in the world. And he thinks you're the coolest girl in the world, and you're the coolest guy in the world. And he's okay with us as we are. He's not asking me to change. He wants me to love me. As I started learning that and started becoming part of communities that didn't judge me, that word broken has bugged me for so long. And I knew what everybody means by broken, but I hated being called broken.
yeah.
And I was like, literally they would say it and I'm like, fuck you.
Yeah.
Why are you calling me broken?
Yeah.
And I started recognizing, wait a second, I don't have to be this. What does it mean for me to be happy? What makes me happy? And I would go, I don't know. And then somebody would say, well, what made little Amanda happy? And I'm like, oh, that one I really don't know. And I would find myself sitting with a journal and going, okay, little Amanda, what would make you happy?
Yeah.
And I started taking things back. I went go-kart riding for the first time. I went and shot a gun which that part I kind of left out. One of the reasons that, things stopped with my uncle was we were in the woods, and the last time he tried to rape me, we were in the woods hunting, and I had a rifle in my hands, and I had the courage to point it at him and tell him no for the first time.
Good for you.
And everybody says, well, why didn't you shoot him? And I'm like, well, that would have been just an added trauma in my childhood, to have shot him. But I did have the courage to do that.
Which is just astounding. Like, you do have a fiery spirit.
Yeah. But I didn't know I had a fiery spirit. Mm-hmm. I didn't know that about myself. I was telling my husband the other day, I was like, it's been so long since I shot for fun. Like, I've got to go with a friend and go shoot because I need to take it all back. Yeah. Like, that doesn't need to be some of my last memories of having a gun in my hand. Right? Like, I've had to learn, wait a second, I get to take these things back. I get to be in control of the narrative. Mm-hmm. I get to realize I am fiery and I'm feisty and it's good. I don't need to be the humble, submissive, meek, mild, quiet girl.
Right.
I can stand up proud. I can put my shoulders back, take up the space in the world, because damn it, I'm unbroken now.
That's right.
And I'm like, man, I love that phrase. When you told me unbroken, I was like, you've got to be kidding me. I've never thought of that. Mm-hmm. That is so beautiful. How I got there, it was a lot of just fighting for survival. Mm-hmm. It didn't feel like I was getting anywhere, but it was being convinced that life has to be more than this.
Right.
And learning to value myself enough to go, I am worth to myself fighting for trying to figure out what it's going to take for me to be happy.
Right. It's amazing to me because most of the people that I've encountered who had some horrible trauma and come out relatively okay, like it was like the trauma was bad and it gave them drive. Like, I don't want to live like this anymore. But it wasn't so bad that it actually broke their spirit permanently, right?
Right.
And with everything you have been through, it did not permanently, harm you where you were never able to heal.
Right.
And that is something that is just, it's blowing my mind because I think of all the different types of hardships or traumas that people have been through, will go through. No matter how bad it is, you can still come out on the other side.
Absolutely.
If you want it.
That's right.
That's really what it is. You choose. You can choose how you respond to it over time.
Yeah.
We have that choice. Mm-hmm. And you chose to heal and go kick some ass in jiu-jitsu.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, which has become a therapeutic modality for me.
Can you share a little bit about that?
Yeah. So my husband and I moved to our current city, and I had been telling him for a couple years, like, man, I'd love to take self-defense classes. Mm-hmm. And he's like, hey, when we move back there, because that was kind of a goal of ours, he goes, I got the guy for you. And I tell him after we move back, like, hey, I want to meet this guy. Like, I think I really want to do self-defense, but I'm scared because what if it triggers me? Like, what if I freak out on the mat? Mm-hmm. And he goes, oh, no, I know the person who can help. And so as he sets up this meeting and I go in and I meet Ryan, a.k.a. what is it, Coach Thanos or actual Thanos? And so I go in and I meet with him and he shares his story with me. And, I won't go into detail. That's his story to share. But I realized, wait a second, this guy gets it. He gets it.
Yeah, he does.
And he started with very light things with me, like spatial awareness and saying no. Did you know you're allowed to say no? Like, it blew my mind. Like, I'd been telling people for years, no is a full sentence. But I didn't have my no voice. Mm-hmm. I didn't know that Amanda can say no for Amanda's sake.
Right. You can teach it to other people.
But I couldn't do it myself, right? So if we would have been somewhere and we were together and you got attacked, man, I'd fight like hell for you. But if they came after me, I'd be like, okay, do whatever you want. Because I wasn't worth it.
It's how you're programmed.
Yeah. It's programming and also belief of I'm not worth it. I might as well, I mean, what's worse, right? And so I start working with him. I do a couple one-on-one sessions with him. And I'm like watching this jiu-jitsu thing going, there is no way in hell I can do that.
Right. These guys, these men rolling around on a mat.
Right. I'm like, that looks like bad sex. Like, I don't know even how to explain it, you know? And that's terrifying to me, like that thought, right? But I'm watching, like, the fiery part in me is like, come on, Amanda, come on. Like, it's like this little voice is just like telling me, you know, you're interested. You know, that would be like an adrenaline high, you know? And so at one point I asked him some question about like, so what are these other classes about? And he's like, oh, that's jiu-jitsu. And we do a mixture here of MMA and jiu-jitsu and da-da-da. And I start going to classes and I find out, wait a second, the other coach here, he gets me too. He's had his own story too. I think I'm actually safe here. And I start trying, and they would put me in a position and be like, okay, what are you going to do? Or usually, especially in the beginning, okay, breathe.
Yes.
Right.
Because I would freak the fuck out.
Yeah.
But I would say to him, no, just hold me here until I breathe.
Right.
Like, don't let me out of it. And they're like, are you sure? Like, you're really freaking out. I'm like, yeah, keep me here. I know mentally I'm safe, but my body is being triggered.
Yep.
And so I want to work through it. And the only way I can do that is by you just holding me in this position.
So you were guiding your own dose exposure therapy.
Yeah. Yeah. It was 100% exposure therapy. And I just kept going back. And at some point, I don't know when it's happened since I've been going, but it became like almost an addiction. Like, I love it. Like, it is my happy place. You know, if I can get 8 hours in a week up there, that is like my goal every week. Like, can I make at one class every day?
Wow. Okay.
You know, like, if I can, that's like the ultimate successful week, right? Who cares about work and school and all the other stuff? I made it. Saw a friend a few months back that I hadn't seen since I started all these classes. And this guy's like a brother to me. And he goes, Amanda, you are so different since you started jiu-jitsu. And I said, what does that mean? And he goes, he's like a brother. I thought he was going to razz me or, you know, something. And he goes, you stand tall. You hold your head up. He's like, you smile so much more. He's like, you're confident. You have this attitude of like, just try it, dude. And I was like, I don't really want to give that vibe off. Like, I'm just a one-stripe white belt. And he goes, no. It's not the arrogance of it. It's like, I'm not scared of you. He's like, I watched you walk through Walmart and you looked people in the eyes instead of looking at the floor. He goes, I've never seen you do that.
It's amazing.
And that's the power of something like jiu-jitsu in a community that is safe.
Right.
And understands trauma.
Yeah, yes. and that's key, is that safe environment. You have to feel as though people are going to hold your heart tenderly.
Yeah. Yep. My husband has a phrase when he talks about walking with your spouse. It's when he speaks to men, he has a men's ministry. And he says, gentle towards their heart and fierce towards their enemies. And that's what I feel like this tribe is. They're gentle and tender towards my heart, but they are fierce towards my enemies.
I can see that.
Yeah.
I can definitely see that.
Yeah. Especially with some of these guys that you know.
Yeah. I'm not sure who's going to be listening to this, but if there's something that you wanted to convey to people, what would that be?
There's hope. You can get out. There is joy and happiness on the other side. You are lovable. You're worthy. And freedom is worth the fight. It takes a lot of grit and a lot of fight to get out. Mm-hmm. And it takes a lot of fight and a lot of grit to find your identity and to know that you are worthy and you are loved. But it is worth the effort. I feel like I've only tapped the surface of it. And yet, I am more than happy to spend the rest of my life peeling that back and finding out even more what living in peace and happiness and joy really is. Because once you get a taste of it, you'll never go back.
Right. Thank you. Thank you so
Absolutely.
much for sharing all of this. And you'll give me some links to your website. You and your
Yes.
husband have a consulting business, and there's some advocacy like hotlines and
Yes,
things you'll give
absolutely.
me. Okay. So we'll make sure that we get that out there also.
Okay. Yep.
And I think we can probably end on that note.
Yeah.
And thank
Well,
you.
thank you for having me.
Absolutely.
I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And we always end with a phrase that we came up with in our household, because people say things like, have a good one, have a great day.
Yes.
And that's a very passive approach.
Mm-hmm.
It's very reactive. You're hoping the weather's nice. You don't get, rained on. You hope
Circumstantial.
somebody doesn't do something to you.
Right.
It's reactive. So we say, make it great.
Ooh, I like that.
So with that, make it great.